All right, so welcome to our September HMIS users meeting. This meeting is going to focus mostly on our data standards updates. So this is a training for data standard updates primarily, and we'll go through why that's happening now and what that means for you. And so we've just got two big sections today in terms of the system updates and then a little bit of what's next. For what's next, we do have some follow-up on the data standards relating to our learning management software. So I want to give you an update about that.
Hey, Andrea.
And then just take a look at that calendar. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt real quick. We actually I can't see your screen. I just see the participants. Oh, nice. So I'm going to toss that in there.
Okay, thank you so much. Let's make sure. Okay, so now you should be able to see the agenda that we're talking through. So we've got the system updates and then a couple other items for what's next, including that training software update on learning management software. Of course, if there are any questions, feel free to raise those during today's meeting, and then we'll also have some time at the end. We are a pretty manageable group today, so if you can mute yourself as you join us and unmute using *6 or that microphone icon to ask questions, would greatly appreciate it. All right. So let's talk data standard updates. This is a regular occurrence. So the fiscal year 2022 is beginning October 1st, and that's because the federal fiscal year begins in October. It's an October through September year. So HUD runs on that federal fiscal year, and HUD is looking to update data standards and kind of do a review and then update every 2 years. So we are at one of those points with updates. These changes are effective October 1st. So as of all of our clients that we're serving on October 1st, we need to be collecting the new set of data standards. These are pretty manageable compared to 2017 if you were back here then. So this shouldn't be too burdensome, but we want to make sure that you have what you need and what we're able to provide before that change happens. So a couple things to note about what will change before October 1st. So we will be updating those paper forms before October 1st, so by September 30th, the day before. And then right now, our live HMIS site is scheduled to update the day before September 30th. I've asked for some specificity on the time if we learn more about the time of day or any other impacts, we'll let you know. Right now, it shouldn't impact us, should happen outside of business hours, September 30th. But we'll want to make sure that you have your paper forms ready to go for that update. That said, we're training now so that we can get prepared, be familiar with the changes, and feel confident heading into October. We are going to be quizzing our users after the changes are implemented, so in the month of October. There's a couple reasons for this. One, we know the details of the changes, but we haven't seen from our software exactly how they're implementing that. So there might be some formatting things that we want to make sure are clear before we do that quizzing, that double check on your knowledge base. And so there's some things there that we're still looking forward to. And then we do have some software updates coming from a training perspective that we'd love to include these updates for. So it's just going to be a little bit after these standards are updated in the system when we'll come back and say, hey, does all these changes make sense? You've had access to this for a few weeks. How's this working? All right, here's a summary of changes. I know this is just a list, and we'll be going through these in detail. So what we have here is there's a few pick list updates, meaning the options that you and clients have to choose from have been updated or will be updated for race, ethnicity, gender, disabling condition, and coordinated entry event. So those are the those big changes that are going to impact everyone in the system. And then there are some changes that are impacting specific programs funded by specific sources that we want to make sure there's some general knowledge on so that you know what's happening with your partners in the community or if you are serving one of these communities. So permanent supportive housing has 3 new data elements, new questions to ask clients about. HOPWA has 1 new question and a new option for the pick list. And then SSVF has some changes as well in their options. All right, so let's go and let's describe these and see what we need to do. Before we get into those weeds, I want to make a note about reporting. So if you have a report due for the current fiscal year data entered before September 30th, we really encourage you to submit early. This is particularly important for SSVF projects. That really has to be, that repository run really needs to be exported before the end of September 30th for a successful submission, because the data quality checks are going to be looking at the older data standards, not the newer ones. So once the system is updated, it's updated for everyone. So you don't want to inadvertently have more errors than is real because of a data standards change. And then for our CoC funded folks, just be aware this shouldn't be quite as significant of an issue as for SSVF providers, but if you have an APR due in early October, we do recommend you try submitting before September 30th so that there's no delays, there's no hiccups with that data standard switch. All right, so let's go into our demographic changes now. Oh, and I apologize, was there a question? No? Okay, just keep in mind if you can mute yourself on your way in. Thanks so much. So questions about demographics and identity, we want to just reinforce those principles for asking these questions in HMIS that go along with the changes for the data standards. So some principles to remember is that the questions about identity are self-reported by clients. They get to identify their responses. That's, we can help try to get that accurate information, but it's really about how the clients are selecting those responses, not anything on our part as providers. There's no guesses or, sort of filling that out for them. We really want that to be responded to by the clients. That will ultimately help us get that accurate information. This is, part of that framework of need to know. So some of this information is sensitive, and we want to make sure that we're not inadvertently sharing something that is not needed in order to provide services. So keep that in mind as you're working with partners in the community. And we want to also make sure that none of these demographic questions are used to deny services. So this is, information gathering, but not used to deny services. All right. So those are some of just our standards as we think about these identity questions. Again, some general reminders about some of these that are sensitive. Intakes and client interviews should try to occur in a private setting. If you can, if you're on the phone, double check that they're in a private setting where they feel comfortable. If you're in person, consider those visual and sound barriers to make that a more comfortable experience. And this is to help us avoid outing or disclosing someone's sensitive information. This includes demographics, but also applies to other sensitive information like disabling conditions and domestic violence history. So we want to make sure we're getting the right information and also building that trust with the client, right? It doesn't help that relationship if now all of a sudden everyone in the shelter knows something about their history they weren't planning to disclose. So when you do have that trust of a client, you can also ask them and confirm how far that applies. If they're disclosing something that's sensitive, is that just for you and the agency, or is that something that can help you make, community referrals with other partners? Okay, and then, one of the rules that is the foundation of our identity questions is the equal access rule. This was originally published in September 2016, and it's about the commitment to fair administration, regardless of marriage status, sexual orientation, or gender identity. So these are important questions that HUD wants us to collect information on, but we also want to make sure that we're not denying services or that's not impacting our service to clients. So we should be serving folks regardless of their gender identity. All right, and on a more local level, our CoCs do have anti-discrimination policies. I'll refer you to the CoC resources specifically for more information, but just remember that HMIS should be used for the client's self-identified chosen name. It is their real name, so when clients identify that chosen name, who may be transgender, that's the real name. So we're going to record that in HMIS. And then whether or not their legal name has changed, you want to record the chosen name, right? So just a reminder that legal name is not what we need for HMIS. That should be the client's name. And then obviously, again, we're going to hammer this home. We also want to make sure to use the client's self-identified gender identity, whether or not their legal gender marker has changed. So we can talk more about that, but on a more local level, these principles are applied for our transgender clients. All right, so let's take a look at those specific elements in HMIS and how this applies. So for HMIS name, we're looking at the first, middle, last name. This is really about identifying clients and their unique experiences. It can help us, match profiles over time. And so that's really the purpose of this information. And so you can see why there's no documentation required, right? It's about the client's identity and deduplicating and making sure you have the right person. In terms of our transgender clients, it's important to remember that 68% of transgender Americans do not have an ID matching their name and gender identity. So there are a lot of barriers with changing the kind of legal documentation for transgender Americans, and so that can be really difficult. And so that's one of the reasons why name is really important to get right in HMIS and to not, even with that first question, not stigmatize or kind of disrupt that trust building process with the client. We want to make sure that you have resources to help clients, potentially if they need to change their IDs or birth certificates. So just a heads up that this all varies state to state. It can be really complicated, and there is a resource here, the National Center for Transgender Equality, that has a document checklist. So keep this in mind as we're talking about how to serve and how to collect information on our clients regardless of gender identity. All right, and again, just to reiterate again, this is really important because names have that power to affirm or dismiss a person's identity. So keep that in mind. Keep in mind that misgendering, misnaming a trans client can be really harmful, and that clients do have the right to ask for a copy of their HMIS records, including names. So just keep that in mind as we are collecting this information. One last thing about name is there is an alias option in our software. This is not a HUD required option in HMIS, and so this could be useful for a maiden name, but it's not for the a trans client's chosen name. Again, other nicknames, you know, Flea, if he was to seek services, that might be appropriate. J-Lo, Johnny, those are appropriate nicknames to put there. But a trans client's chosen name is not a nickname, it is their name. Okay, and so we're talking about all this in particular because there's been some updates to gender in our October data standard updates. And so the gender element is about a person's internal or innate sense of themselves, and it may not match the sex that they were assigned at birth. And now HUD is allowing one or more gender identities. So how we are collecting this. So again, documentation is not necessary. This is strictly self-reported from clients, right? So we want to make sure we give them the options and they can select from those. We'll hammer this home. Staff observations should not be used. And so here are the options that we have for clients. Clients are allowed to select up to 5 from female, male, a gender that is not singularly female or male, transgender, or questioning. So if a client presents for services and is identifying themselves as transgender and female, then there would be those 2 options selected in HMIS for the client, both female and transgender. Now, this is, there's a couple things to note. This is a little bit of a change, right? Previously, we've had kind of just different options that get at the same information, but you had to select one identity as opposed to being able to select multiple identities. The other big difference here is questioning. And HUD wants to really make sure that we know that questioning is different from client doesn't know as a response. So questioning is about questioning, you know, what gender identity or gender identities is representative of a person. And so that's really more of an internal, you know, internal exploration of one's gender identity as opposed to client doesn't know response, which is more of that data quality response. So questioning is a response that that should be really differentiated from client doesn't know. And so this, you know, this can be a sensitive question. Some folks can feel, you know, like, why are you asking me this? Whether they think you should assume something or not. So just keep in mind that, you know, if you're not sure how to phrase this question, you can try, you know, which of these gender options best describes how you identify. And so just really leaving it up to the client to identify, you know, one or more of these options for their gender identity. All right. Any questions about gender, gender identity, names, and the equal access rule?
I would just like to point out that we know that these options are not necessarily fully representative of how folks like to identify themselves. And we have pointed that out to HUD. Same goes for race and ethnicity categories. They said they are continuing to do some work and exploration on these. That's why they continue to make some changes. So we will continue to make updates as HUD does, and we will continue to point out that these are not always representative of folks. But in the meantime, these are the options that we have, and so we do have to work within the options that we have, and to the best of our ability, even though we know that not everyone identifies these ways. So just wanted to point that out there in general. Our continued advocacy and continued conversations with HUD as well.
Yep, and that can be helpful framing too for clients if they're not sure. You know, these are the options that we have, and we want to make sure what fits best. Maybe not perfectly. Just so you know, there are some great resources available. Some of these were referenced in that material just to help inform how we're approaching both name and gender questions in HMIS, and these are linked in the slides, which are available online. So as my colleague Nicole was pointing out, race is another demographic question that has been hard for HUD to work with, and they are working on updating these questions as well, or these options, these pick list options. So race is still one or more racial categories for a client. Again, these are self-reported identities, not staff observations. And a client may select up to 5 of the categories. Keep in mind that our HMIS software requires that one be primary. So if there's one that is, you know, listed first, I would just, you know, go in order of that. Again, this is not ideal language to talk about race and racial identities. It's what we have, and HUD is trying to make some updates. So let's go through those updates. Here in italics, there is additional language in each of the categories to try to better fit different racial identities to what folks actually identify as. So for American Indian and Alaska Native, Indigenous has been added. For Asian American has been added. For Black or African American, African has been added. And for Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, the term other Pacific Islander has been kind of condensed into Pacific Islander. And there are no changes for white right now. HUD is very aware that these are also not perfect, but what we have. So these are very kind of language-based changes. We want to make sure that hopefully this will help clients identify the best racial categories to select. But the way we ask this question to clients remains the same. We do want to still ask for that self-reported data from clients. If you need kind of additional phrasing help, HUD suggests, do you know if your ancestors were originally from a country like Spain, somewhere in Africa, or are you a part of an indigenous group? So the purpose of this question is to really look at ancestry, where is your family from, as opposed to where you live now, right? At least most of our clients are going to be American. All right, so some of the changes will hopefully help communicate this to clients. Just some reminders here that this is still required for all clients, and this is really something that should be collected when you create the client profile at record creation or at intake, that project start assessment. The other thing to keep in mind is that this is distinct from ethnicity. This is not the same as ethnicity, and both questions are required for all clients. And again, with the self-reported data, don't use the default, particularly for households. Folks in households may identify different ways. You really want to make sure that each client is identified properly. So let's talk about ethnicity a little bit. Ethnicity has also changed for these data standard updates. And again, HUD is trying to make the options more inclusive for folks. So ethnicity is still the category of the client that may include a person of Cuban, Mexican, Puerto Rican, South or Central American, or other Spanish culture or origin, regardless of race. Again, this is self-reported. We're not using staff observations. And so the two options have kind of been extended a little bit to be more inclusive. So it used to be non-Hispanic, non-Latino, or Hispanic Latino. And here we see that they are adding the options of Latina, Latino, or Latinx to try to be more inclusive regardless of gender identity. And yeah, so those are pretty much very similar, but want to make sure that that's clear. That last letter is really about the gender associated with the Spanish words, and so it just gives you those three options there. That's what all of the parentheses are for. This is a great time to remind ourselves that, even though this is a combined option of Hispanic or Latinx, Hispanic is really referring to those roots of language with Spanish-speaking folks, and then Latinx is referring to like Latin America geographically. So someone could identify as Hispanic or Latinx with either of those sorts of ethnic or cultural roots. All right, race and ethnicity are definitely, one of the common questions that we hear from providers is like, okay, I've got someone identifying here, but they're not identifying for the other question. And we really want to emphasize that race and ethnicity are required for everyone, and they are distinct from each other. So really encourage clients to identify, whichever one they may be reticent about or unsure about. Giving folks those options and allowing them to self-report is really important. Okay, let's continue on. Some additional changes that impact everyone. So we mentioned briefly disabling condition, disability types. There's a little update here. The pick list has been updated to have more accurate language. So what was previously known as mental health problem will now be known as mental health disorder. Previously known as substance abuse will now be known as substance use disorder. So these are, pretty subtle changes to the options in disability, but you'll see this applied on October 1st for all clients, all project types. And so we want to make sure we're using the right language when we're asking clients about their disabling condition. Any questions about disability? Okay. All right, other changes that impact everyone is for coordinated entry events. So there are a few different options now for the pick list for these events. These are the three new options for coordinated entry: referral to emergency assistance or flex fund or furniture assistance, referral to emergency housing voucher, and referral to housing stability voucher. So CE event is really a data element that is defined by the type of referrals listed. Basically, it's for projects either providing a referral or receiving a referral. And this is really important and required for our Orange and Balanced Estate CoCs. This is only encouraged for the Durham projects. So you may have seen this data element on your assessments. This is to be used as applicable for our homeless prevention, diversion, other coordinated entry access points like shelter, and our crisis intervention and permanent housing providers. For permanent housing, you're probably more on the receiving end, but with these new vouchers available, you may also be making those referrals, recording that in HMIS. This is just a very important element for our HUD-funded CE systems in Orange and Balanced Estate, but also for kind of giving y'all credit for those important referrals. It takes a lot of work to make those referrals, to identify folks, to work as a community, to make sure that the right folks are going for the right resources. And so we really want to make sure that you're recording that in HMIS. This element does apply to heads of households only, so keep that in mind.
Andrea, can I ask a quick question?
Please, yeah.
Thanks. So that CE entry or the CE event for the referrals, are folks only doing that at CE intake, or are they doing that at exit as well? And the reason I ask is that there are a number of folks who get entered into the Orange County CE project, who are then placed on our home committee list, who from the home committee may get referred to an emergency housing voucher, but we may not know that when the CE is initiated.
Absolutely. So that's how that centralized CE project entry can be really helpful. So yes, when someone is entered into any project, any one of these referral partners, you may already know that a CE event is going to happen, but also at exit. So this can really happen at any time during an enrollment, during a project start, interim, or exit for a client. Something like the emergency assistance, furniture assistance, that may be at a totally different point in time than that emergency housing voucher, which would usually be at exit. So when you know, right, when that referral is happening, that's when you want to record that in HMIS. And as the community is making that decision, it will be important to reaffirm and identify who's entering that data for your community. Yes, also at interims. Yeah, so coordinated entry event can happen at any time, start, interim, or exit. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the CoC PSH requirements. Now, not all of us on the call run PSH projects, but it is important to know what information our community partners are collecting and may have to contribute to community discussions like referrals to emergency housing vouchers. So first up, we've got a new data element for well-being, a client's well-being, and this is to collect information about a client's kind of social and emotional resources. This is required for all CoC-funded permanent supportive housing projects. This is collected through a kind of a scale of agree to disagree on 4 statements. These are the 4 statements. So does a client perceive their life has value and worth? Does a client perceive they have support from others who will listen to problems? Does a client perceive they have a tendency to bounce back after hard times? And does a client's frequency of feeling nervous, tense, worried, frustrated, or afraid? So for each of these statements, the project needs to provide a strongly agree, agree, neutral, disagree, or strongly disagree response. This is for heads of households specifically, those eligible clients, and this is to be collected at intake, at HMIS annual assessment, and at exit. So this is, again, the HMIS interim annual assessment, not the recertification, but the HMIS annual assessment. This will need to be updated over time. So as you can see, you might collect it once, at project start, and then check in on an annual basis at that annual assessment. And over time, we'll be able to see how these statements change. Does the client's resiliency grow, say? How does housing impact their well-being? This is a new element. HUD is kind of trying it out. I'll just say that. So we'll see what benefits yield from this. The next requirement for CoC PSH projects is general health status. This is a summary status of the client's overall health, and the status options range from excellent to very good to fair to poor. So just a 1 through 4 kind of categorization of a client's general health status. This is, again, required for all CoC funded PSH. This is expanded from the well-being question, though. This is required for heads of households and all adults. So if there are any partners, spouses, even adult children in that household, they're also going to need responses to this general health status question. This is only collected at the start and exit. And again, anyone over 18 needs a response. All right. Lastly, for our PSH, the changes for PSH data standards is this moving on assistance provided. Moving on is a technique that PSH has been using for a long time. Other projects are kind of beginning to think about those tactics as well. But this is about collecting, what, if any, moving on resources the client has used. These moving on resources are kind of defined by this list below. It's going to include both the date of assistance, so when did they receive this, and what is the type of assistance. Is that a subsidized housing application? Is that financial assistance, like security deposit? Is this non-financial assistance, housing navigation, transition support? It's a big shift, moving from, say, PSH to independent rental. Any housing referral or placement. So again, this is kind of syncing back to the coordinated entry event. These would be related potentially. And then there is an other option. Now, you all know how I feel about other. It's not descriptive, doesn't tell me anything, doesn't tell you anything in terms of any patterns of service. So if you can identify the assistance through one of those other 4 categories, we really want to encourage you to use that instead of other. If you do use other, there will be a text box to specify. So you'll need to then detail what that other assistance was. This is only for heads of households, and moving on assistance is only provided, as they're enrolled at project interim. Those updates are maybe an annual assessment, probably not, or exit. So the idea of moving on is that you're kind of closing down the support from that PSH project. So we would probably see this mostly at exits, but could possibly be at an update as well. So when or if this assistance is provided, record it, and that's beginning October 1st. Okay, HOPWA is another project that has a couple updates. Again, if there are no HOPWA providers on the line, we do want to make sure that we just as a community know about these data standard updates. So there's a new data element for HOPWA projects that serve clients with HIV or AIDS. One is the prescribed antiretroviral question. This is to collect whether or not a client has access to this essential health care. All projects that are HOPWA funded are going to be required to collect this, and the phrasing of the question is, has the participant been prescribed antiretroviral drugs? This is just really critical to folks with HIV or AIDS and can just kind of turn around the prognosis in, I think, about 6 months. So really crucial to managing this condition. This applies to all household members with HIV or AIDS, so whether they're adults or children, this applies. And this is updated at any point in time, start, interim, or exit. All right, and so there's no back data entry needed for this, but you do want to make sure that this is collected for everyone by the end of your fiscal year. So just double check that this is happening throughout the year. The other HOPWA change is that there's a specific pick list option for Ryan White funded medical or dental assistance. So this is a different program. It's not housing related, it's healthcare related, but housing is healthcare, and we know that stable housing for clients with HIV or AIDS is crucial to management of their condition, and so this question has been added, and the responses allow the project to kind of follow the progression of either accessing this assistance or identifying what they have and apply. Again, this is for all eligible clients with HIV or AIDS. Okay, SSVS is the last kind of program with some changes for this year. The SSVS financial assistance, there's a pick list change, so the options for identifying those different financial assistance types have changed or will change on October 1st. There's some general housing stability assistance that has been condensed, and food assistance is now a response. Kind of an interesting shift, as we know that food assistance is really crucial to maintaining housing. This does apply to all clients receiving this assistance, not just heads of households, the whole household. And we recommend that SSVS providers review clients in October once the changes have happened to make sure that food assistance is applied as needed. The other change for SSVS providers is for their homeless prevention targeting criteria. This is a significant change. They have condensed a whole bunch of different questions, and they're going to be, the VA and HUD are going to be applying data quality to these questions in a new way. So the new SSVS export is going to review the consistency between questions in the intake for disabling condition, income, veterans information, area median income, and household composition with the questions in this HP targeting criteria. And so you could be dinged for discrepancies there. This is only for heads of households in those homeless prevention SSVS projects, and there's technically no data entry required for previous clients on October 1. I would just make sure to double check that everything was right beforehand. This no back data entry necessary means that the previous responses will be copied over, but if you had bad previous responses, then those will be copied over and might not be the most accurate ones for you. So make sure to avoid errors and submit your fiscal year 21 SSVS export ahead of October 1. Okay, so there are some resources that you can reference for these changes. HUD has these four tools. The interactive tool is particularly helpful, I think, for staff and HMIS users. It helps you kind of navigate their 160-page document, right? You don't have to go through the whole manual or the whole dictionary. The interactive tool can be really helpful just to zero in on, okay, I really want to just brush up on what the heck's going on with these racial categories. And you can pull that up and see all of HUD's guidance on race. The other thing is this data entry for fiscal year 22 updates. This just confirms what we've been talking about in terms of there's not a lot of back data entry required, but in case you want to double check that, all the changes are outlined there, and what you need to do to manually get ready is detailed there. The resources from our own team are going to be mostly the paper forms on the admin page, and then also our slides here and the recording on our news archive page. Slides have already been posted there, so that is ncceh.org/HMIS/news, and then the paper forms will be updated by September 30th. Okay, so just to sum up our next steps, you don't have any back data entry required. Awesome. There's no kind of rush to update all of your active clients on October 1st. HUD is requiring our software vendor to copy everything that has changed over to the new data standards. So what you are required to do is to collect and add data as required for your project. You're going to want to print those new forms if you use paper forms. You're going to want to confirm changes on October 1st. So just peek in the system, make sure that your client looks right. If you know that you have a client identifying as transgender or multiple races, maybe just double check that all that information was copied over correctly, and let us know if it wasn't. And later in October, we're going to ask you to pass a quiz just to confirm that you know the updated data standards. Report changes will also be happening, so stay tuned for those. Sometimes the report changes take a couple weeks extra, at least, when we have data standard updates. So there may be a little bit of a delay in things like an updated CAPER and APR. So just a heads up on that. Okay, any questions about next steps or what's required of you for these data standard updates? All right, let's get into the last bit of our information here for just our regular calendar and what's next section. We do want to highlight that we have a new tool coming, a new training system coming soon. This is called a learning management system. This has been developed by our partners at ICA, and we are going to adopt that to expand our training capacity and provide a better training experience for you and for the back end. This should allow us internally to track users a little bit better with and just make that easier, and then also make sure that annual requirements are just smoother and kind of that there's a one-stop shop for all of the HMIS users for whatever training you may need. We also are kind of gaining a couple other people in terms of their capacity to record trainings, to update trainings, and create new ones. We know that it's been a couple years since we launched this implementation and we haven't been able to update trainings very much. We need to do that, so this will help us do that. In terms of the plan, we are gradually going to transition from trainings that are currently posted on YouTube to the LMS. So stay tuned for more information there. And this gradual process will begin with our annual privacy training and new data standards quiz. So those will be the kind of first two items that we'll do in our LMS. And I will give us a more specific timeline soon. Right now, the timeline is October-ish. So stay tuned for that. In terms of our calendar, there are 2 more opportunities to talk about data standards in case any of your colleagues were not able to make today's. Again, that's Thursday the 16th at 1, Thursday the 23rd at 10 a.m. We are looking forward to the annual privacy review and new data standard quizzes in October. And then just to confirm, our October HMIS user meetings will go back to the CoC specific timing. So Orange is at October 4th, Balance of State is the 21st, and Durham is the 28th. Then with the close of a federal fiscal year, we begin reporting. So we will begin reporting on kind of strategies, troubleshooting, data quality checks for the longitudinal system analysis in the fall. All right, if you have any questions, concerns as you're going through this material or as you're thinking more about this, please reach out to us at the help desk, hmis@ncceh.org. And if there are any questions, I can certainly take those now. All right, well, I'm going to close our recording then. Thank you all so much for joining us.